Is the MOU dead?
It's a very interesting question. To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore.
It's 5 a.m. in New York City, 10 a.m. in London. Good morning. I'm Vonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Oil jumping after those comments from President Trump that the ceasefire, as far as he's concerned, is over. This after targeting 80 sites in Iran and having revoked those oil waivers. This all as NATO gathers more meetings set for a second day in the summit in Ankara. So let's take a look at markets then, because we are seeing the war trade coming back on. This after a host of actions yesterday, and on the flip side, Iran targeting Bahrain and also Kuwait. Remains to be seen whether this escalates or whether we get a pause in activities. Trump did say that the negotiators could continue negotiating. As far as he was concerned, it didn't matter. He didn't want to deal with Iranians. As you can see, it's being reflected in the oil trade. WTI, which was below 70 yesterday, right back almost at $75 a barrel just in the last little while. Brent crude headed for $80 a barrel, and European gas futures, they were up more than 4% yesterday, up another 5% today. Yields wise, we've been rising across the board. We were above 5% at the close of the session yesterday. Right now we're at 507.21. If you look at the 2-year yield, all the way up past 4.21, and futures lower today as well, taking another leg lower after those comments just in the last half hour, by the way, from President Trump in response to a reporter's question in Ankara, Turkey. As you can see, S&P futures down 1%. Nasdaq futures pointing to a decline of more than 1.3%. This all, of course, as everything seems to be blowing up in Korea as well. We have hit a bear market, and I do want to point out that the VIX in the United States is now above 18, having jumped after those remarks. So let's get to more about that bear market and that semiconductor trade just falling off the charts. Winnie Su is in Hong Kong for us. Winnie.
Bonnie, as you just mentioned, we are seeing Asian stocks extending losses following those comments from Trump, especially with oil prices surging as well. Now, we have most of the markets in our region closed already, but when it comes to India's Nifty 50, we are seeing losses extending to about 2%, and also the volatility gauge for India also rising the most in about 4 months. Now, when it comes to elsewhere in Asia, as you just mentioned, South Korea's Kospi Index down about 5%, entering a bear territory, down about 20% from its recent peak hit just last month. Now, this rotation away from tech is actually going into the underperformers in Asia. As you flip the board and take a look at where it's gaining today, specifically in shares listed in Hong Kong, a gauge of Chinese shares listed in Hong Kong up about 4% today, and that's being led by the gains in Alibaba, also with some optimism about its upcoming earnings as well. Back to you, Vonnie.
All right, we'll be keeping an eye on the Korean trade, obviously, but also the China trade, with investors rotating into what appears to be a cheaper AI trade as well. Now, let's get across to London. We want to get a look at what's been happening in Europe. Justina Lee is with us.
Good morning, Vonnie. It's a similarly bearish picture here in Europe, with the Stocks Europe 600 down 1.8% and energy being the only sector that's trading up today. Now, of course, the higher oil is also rippling through the bond market here. This German 10-year bond yield is up nearly 7 or 8 basis points. And what's really interesting here is that the French bond yield is up like 11 or 12 basis points. So we can see that premium widening there. And that's because a court yesterday cleared far-right leader Marine Le Pen to run in the presidential election again. And she has said that she will do so. And I think this is reflecting the uncertainty over the political outlook at a time when there's been a lot of investor concern over the fiscal sustainability of the French government. Now, when it comes to bonds, and if we flip the board here, we can see that ultimately it comes down to expectations for what the ECB is going to do with oil still rising. And we can see here a big jump in recent days as investors increasingly price in more than one full rate hike by the end of this year, probably coming around the September time, now that it seems like the inflation outlook is worsening again, Vonnie.
Justina, thank you so much. So much to parse in today's market. Let's get straight to Turkey, where President Trump has just said in the last few minutes he believes the ceasefire is over.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them.
These comments coming after the U.S. launched a new wave of strikes against Iran, having revoked that waiver allowing sales of Iran's oil. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook is at the NATO Summit in Ankara, where those comments have just happened. Ollie, the president seems sincere. He has left a few caveats in there, like, for example, the negotiators can keep talking. And he's at the NATO Summit. Will NATO leaders try to talk him down? The markets certainly think war is back on.
Yeah, this is the last thing that the NATO leaders would like to see happening in the oil market, would like to see happening in Iran. All the people I've spoken to, there's been a very active conversation about what the European role is to potentially, obviously, de-escalate, to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, this is all in the American sort of court because the Europeans have wanted to take no part. And in that press conference with Secretary General Mark Rutte, President Donald Trump, it was already pretty dense in news. And until that moment, that sort of bombshell, he was asked by a reporter, completely unscripted, how do you view the ceasefire? Do you think the MOU and the ceasefire are over? The president took a beat. He did think about it, and it was clear that he sort of knew the gravity of what he was saying. And he says that basically, as far as he's concerned, the ceasefire is over, that the MOU has failed. Now, the consequence for that within the markets, you've been sort of elucidating throughout the morning here over the last couple of minutes. Of course, we have not seen the oil price go quite to that same level that we saw in the war when it was in sort of most kinetic activity, but it's certainly rising pretty precipitously. There's a real question about what comes next, what those conversations in the NATO are going to be. There's a lot of important business about burden sharing, about Ukraine, about Russia. And I think the hope, certainly for Zelensky, who is here, is to not be completely overshadowed now by this conversation about Iran and sort of the path forward. President Donald Trump, they're saying that the Iranians are scum, that they're liars, that they are cheaters, that there's basically no way of working with them. And that's a very different message than what we got from the President of the United States even yesterday, where he was saying this new crop of leaders in Iran are people that we can work with. That obviously has changed in the president's mind over the last few hours.
Ollie, you mentioned that Ukraine obviously is taking a little bit of a back seat. What has been managed to be achieved up to now at the NATO summit, at least, even if the narrative moves on? And also, I want to ask you about those Greenland comments. How is Denmark reacting to that?
Yeah, Vani, there's really so much to unpack here. On the question of Ukraine, there is expected to be that bilateral meeting with the President of the United States and Volodymyr Zelensky that was originally scheduled for about 2.5 hours from now. We'll see if that goes to schedule. As we've been discussing over the last couple of days, Vani, for Zelensky, he's really seeing this opportunity of gaining momentum on the battlefield, saying that he does have cards to try to re-engage the President of the United States in the diplomatic effort, get him on his side, trying to get some of that hardware, some of that air defense. As you mentioned, he also made those comments in that press conference on Greenland, again, reiterating the problem that Greenland is a big problem. It's a big moment of dissatisfaction for the President of the United States in his relationship with NATO, that the United States needs it, Denmark doesn't need it, and he sort of went on a very sort of long diatribe there about how quickly Denmark fell to the Nazis and that basically the United States came in, took care of Greenland, and should never have given it back. But again, Vani, I just want to flag just another risk in this conversation that we haven't really talked about, got lost in this press conference. Trump talking about Spain. Spain is the only nation that has not committed to spend 5% of its GDP on defense and NATO. This has been obviously a contentious problem, not just for the President of the United States, but a lot of other European allies. But basically Trump saying that he wants to cut off trade with Spain. He wants to cut off basically contact with summits and leaders of the Spanish. That could have huge consequences. The EU trades as a bloc in terms of the trading relationship. It is not individual. It is not bilateral. If the Trump administration does move against Spain, it's going to be a very difficult conversation for the European Union. It could blow up the entire trade agreement that currently exists between the EU and the United States that has been hard fought, took forever to put into place, and of course is worth more than $1 trillion.
True. Spain didn't allow U.S. troops use its bases either, Ollie, so I'm sure Trump had that in the back of his mind as well. Thank you so much, Chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook. Let's get more from the Middle East now, as the situation seems to be escalating pretty quickly. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar joins. Abir, obviously these remarks from President Trump about the ceasefire, in his opinion, being over have just come, so we may not have a reaction from the region yet. But what did Iran target in the region overnight?
Yeah, Vonnie, so we saw a reaction on the U.S. attacks, the 80 targets in Iran. Iran did say through the deputy foreign minister earlier this morning that the retaliation by the country will be decisive. And so we saw that happening in the early hours of the morning. And then we saw President Trump making those remarks in Ankara, quite serious remarks. Now, it was just important to caveat that by the end of his announcement, he did say that he will let the negotiators go on with the talks. They have to come back to him. And by the negotiators, he means Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who have been carrying on those talks in Qatar. That is the latest round of talks in Doha last week. And so we don't have a reaction on President Trump's remarks from the Iranian side yet, but it does look like Iran is asserting dominance when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, particularly, Vonnie. What we saw overnight is the retaliation by the Americans when it comes to Iran's attack on the ship, the Qatar LNG-laden ship on the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. And so the U.S. said that was unacceptable and essentially targeted some 80 targets in Iran or so, most of those weapon launchers, most of those defense targets. Another thing that's quite interesting this morning is that we understood that Pete Hegseth was going to Israel today or tomorrow, and that trip is now canceled, just being reported now. And then Iran's retaliation to the U.S. attack also came in the shape of attacking Kuwait and Bahrain, targets in the GCC that it had singled out in previous times. So we're seeing that happen again. Kuwait, just now, before I came on with you, Vonnie, saying that it intercepted 2 missiles, 13 drones in the early hours of Wednesday. No casualties, no injuries reported. But we're still seeing this tit for tat sort of a narrative happening again. At the heart of all of this obviously remains the Strait of Hormuz, the movement there. You've seen the instantaneous market reaction to the remarks by President Trump. We're seeing Brent crude at around $79 a barrel now. Granted, not the same levels that we saw the 125 during the peak of the war in the region. But we're seeing movement in markets taking these threats a little bit more seriously than previous times. And it does look, Vonnie, that this is the most serious narrative escalation that we've seen since the arrival of that MOU about 3 weeks ago. We've seen skirmishes here and there in the Strait of Hormuz in GCC countries, namely Kuwait and Bahrain again, but nothing as serious, quite as serious as this. So for the time being, what we're monitoring is the reaction by Iran, and if their response to President Trump is going to be as serious as what he just laid out about 30 minutes ago or so.
Exactly, Abir, and also shipping in the Strait, right? Does it completely come to a standstill again? It hadn't come to a standstill, but it was starting to be a little bit more precarious for the ships that were in there. Abir Abu Omar, thank you for joining us from Dubai. And I just want to point out we were watching the family photo being taken there at the NATO meeting. You saw host Viktor Orban along with the Secretary General Mark Rutte, and beside him President Donald Trump, who had said he was in a good mood. Not sure if that good mood is holding, though, after the reporter's question and President Trump effectively declaring, in his opinion, the ceasefire done. And you can see the reaction immediately in Brent crude and in WTI. Brent crude trading very close to $79 a barrel. We're back well at levels that we haven't been at for several weeks now. European gas future is up more than 5%. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Singapore's Temasek is expanding its AI investments after its portfolio reached a record $400 billion. It plans to raise its AI allocation from 6% to as much as 15% by 2031. Temasek is also increasing its focus on the Americas. Hedge funds posted their strongest first-half run in 5 years. According to research firm Pivotal Path, the industry returned 7.2% on average through June. Tech-focused funds, though, led the gains, posting a much higher average and obviously helped by a rally in chip stocks. Maine's Democratic Party is urging Graham Plattner to withdraw immediately from the U.S. Senate race after new allegations of sexual assault. The party is looking to unseat Republican Susan Collins, the seat key to winning control of the Senate in November. Plattner's team did not respond to a request for comment. Coming up, the AI rotation trade gathering pace in Asia. We'll take a look at the winners and losers next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. Investors pulling money out of chip makers and putting it into China. The shift pushing the Kospi into a technical bear market after gains that made it the world's best performing major benchmark this year. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence joins us now for more. So in 12 sessions, we have been reduced to a bear market in Korea, Matt, although if you've been in it from the start, you've made plenty. Is this a permanent shift now, or is it possible that Korea will pick up again?
It's a great question, and I think it all depends really on what happens next in the AI trade. I think, what we've seen this week is results essentially kind of come in with market expectations. The market has been behind the momentum in the AI business for maybe the last 6 months to 12 months, and that's kind of caught up now, and I think the results suggested that maybe at least for the near term there isn't going to be another upward surprise in the kind of pace at which the big hyperscalers invest in AI capacity, and that's going to kind of curtail any incremental positive surprise for the likes of Samsung and SK Hynix. So I think that's kind of where we stand right now, and so in that context it's not perhaps that surprising that investors think, okay, the momentum has moved away into other parts of the kind of AI and technology space, which is why we're seeing the shift into China, because the likes of Alibaba have been quite muted. The market expectations for those companies have been quite subdued, and that maybe there's some more value to be found there.
Yeah, so Alibaba was up more than 10%, Tencent up about 4%. Is China the new Korea, or is it going to take some time for China to catch up a little bit better to the US?
Yeah, the fundamental story there with China Tech is quite different. It's not so much at the moment, at least, on the kind of hardware side. It's more on the services side. I think what we've seen with Alibaba today is some kind of positive broker notes out previewing the upcoming earnings, and that after some subdued momentum on e-commerce, both in terms of sales growth and profitability, that actually the numbers they report are going to be a little bit better than expected, and that perhaps the tide is turning in China in terms of economic activity.
All right, Matt, thank you so much. You'll be back later in the programme. We have lots more to talk about in the tech sphere. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, a look at what's making headlines in your front page news. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York, and it's time now for your front page news. First up, the Wall Street Journal on the Manhattan high-rise at risk of partial collapse after columns buckled and floors sagged. The building is the former headquarters of Pfizer that's being converted into apartments. A representative for one of the developers, Metroloft, says the company was working with city officials to understand the scope of the situation. Next up, the Financial Times on Marine Le Pen's decision to run for president despite judges upholding her embezzlement conviction. The FT says it's a risky bet, but it does end more than a year of uncertainty over whether she or her hand-picked successor, Jordan Bardella, would lead her party's campaign to replace President Macron. And finally, Bloomberg reporting UniCredit is moving closer to control of Commerzbank after investors tendered enough shares to raise the stake it can potentially oversee to 47.6%. We're going to stay on this story now and bring in Bloomberg's Tom Metcalf. So, Tom, what exactly was the investor reaction? Are they supportive of this move?
Yes, well, so far it's been somewhat muted. The shares of both banks not really moving too much. I mean, I think what this really establishes is Orchel is certainly playing his hand very well. Commerzbank have actually just come out and said, look, we take note of this result, but again, they're keeping to their stance that, the normal investors, the retail investors, are just not participating in this. I think from UniCredit's point of view, they're like, we've got 47.6% effectively of this bank, so, certainly some investors are behind our pitch. So it does seem, look, the end game's still months away, but my take would be, this is a victory for Orchel. 47% is probably more than they thought they would get. They've gone up from 29% now to close to 50%. And effectively, in any other world where you don't have these kind of political, regulatory, Labour representatives all kind of with a big stake in the game, you would say, this is UniCredit's bank effectively now. But obviously there's a lot of resistance, a lot of very powerful resistance. So, the final result, the final shape of what actually happens between these two firms is still, I do think still up for debate.
What about Bettina Orlopp? She's not going to give up without some kind of a fight. What happens there?
Yeah, CEO of Commerzbank. Look, she has been just so consistently anti this, lining up as you'd expect with Berlin, saying, this is not appropriate. We're not getting a premium here. Let's keep Commerzbank independent. Certainly the relations between the two firms I would characterize as a bit frosty. Certainly be exchanging barbs publicly. So I think if this does start to move towards a world where effectively UniCredit is in de facto control, I don't imagine she will be CEO of Commerzbank for too much longer.
Germany doesn't love this either, Tom, and we'll have to continue to monitor the situation because Germany will certainly have a response at some point as well. Tom, thank you for all your reporting. That is Bloomberg's Tom Metcalf. Want to bring you a market check now, though, because the situation is intensifying this morning. President Trump has just made comments at the NATO summit to the effect that he believes the ceasefire with Iran is over and he doesn't want to deal with them anymore, although he is allowing negotiators continue talks should they wish. It had an immediate impact on markets, which were already jittery after the 80 strikes that the U.S. made on Iran overnight and after the U.S. had revoked those oil sanctions waivers. So crude in New York, above $75 a barrel. Brent headed towards 80. We have futures lower. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City, 10:30 a.m. in London. Good morning. I'm Vonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. We're seeing a big market reaction after President Trump says, in his opinion, the ceasefire is over between the U.S. and Iran. Oil spiking, futures pointed lower. This as the NATO summit continues in Ankara. We're going to have coverage throughout the day from that NATO summit. We're also watching tech as Korea enters a bear market 12 days after hitting peak. So let's get to those markets now. We are seeing oil rise more than 6% apiece for Brent and WTI. We're headed towards $80 a barrel on Brent just after these comments made less than an hour ago in response to a reporter's question after President Trump and Mark Rutte were speaking at the NATO conference. The reporter asked if the MOU was still live, and the president said he believes the ceasefire is a waste of time and is over. He doesn't want to talk to the Iranians, though he did acknowledge that the negotiators can continue to talk if they want to. He just thinks it's a waste of time. European gas futures continuing to climb up 6%. If we take a look cross-asset-wise, you'll see S&P futures, which were already lower before these comments, taking another leg down. Tech having another difficult day. And yields, which spiked yesterday, up another 2 to 3 basis points across the board. Safety trade, and of course, there's an eye or two towards the FOMC minutes coming out later on today as well. You can see VIX index spiking now too as well, although these days a spike really means, up to 18 and change. Let's get to some individual market movers now. Plenty going on in the world, even without the latest developments. Chloe Melly, what have you been watching?
Good morning, Vonnie. Alibaba is up very strongly this morning as investors turn quite optimistic on its earnings, with this enthusiasm, this optimism really centered around its e-commerce activities rather than any kind of AI efforts. And this is part as well of this broader AI rotation trade that we've been seeing, where chip makers are losing out and money is being poured into internet companies like Alibaba. Moving on to U.S. technology stocks, including Micron and SanDisk, seeing quite a lot of downside there this morning as this AI rally cools in Asia. We are seeing this spillover in the US, and we're down, as we can see, quite significantly, more than 6% for both of those. And finally, Navitas is also slumping this morning after Warp Speed filed a patent infringement lawsuit against the company. And so we are down a lot this morning on the back of that, about 9% for Navitas in pre-market trading.
Okay, a big move there. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there, all over the tech trade. President Trump's latest remarks on the tentative US-Iran ceasefire sparking fresh concerns. Joining us now is Mark McCormick, Chief FX Strategist for BMO Capital Markets. Mark, the dollar is stronger again today. I mean, it had been strengthening once again anyway. Do you imagine that this fresh injection of jitteriness into the market over what might happen next in the Middle East will have an impact on the dollar trade?
Yeah, I think the only thing it's going to do is reinforce it. I think there's kind of two tensions in the market that you could think about right now. The market's been pricing in a Fed hike. It's been pricing in hikes by other central banks. The RBNZ hiked overnight. And that tension's kind of been met with very positive sentiment on risk assets. So equities, even though there's been a couple wobbles, basically since we've been seeing the memorandum of understanding coming out, the equity markets have kind of loved that news. So like coming into this, there's a positioning tension between rate hikes and risk sentiment. We've seen that correlation actually work in the dollar. It almost looks like a sandwich a bit, where on the one side you have the dollar going up as rates are going up, and then the dollar going down as risk sentiment, it turns positive. So the point that we've been highlighting is, number one, is you should be focused on rate hikes. You should be focused on higher for longer. You should be focused on the fact that central banks are turning much more focused on inflation, and that is going to be a driver of negative risk sentiment. And now this just adds to that story where you have higher rates, and now you basically have geopolitical tensions flaring back up in Iran.
Exactly. It makes that portion of the Fed's discussion, I suppose, a little bit more obvious, right? The inflation portion. That said, we did get that week employment report. Can we just ignore it?
I think you could. I think you toss out one report, right? I think the way that we kind of look at markets is very similar. Maybe the way that markets kind of trade these concepts and the way that they're kind of thinking how central banks view them. But essentially, if you look at the data in the U.S., you have data momentum, you've got data revisions, you've also got surprises of whether or not the data comes in better than expected. All three of those indicators are running positive. So essentially, the Fed is kind of dealing what looks like an accelerating economy into Q2. And again, they haven't hit their inflation target in well over 5 years. And if you look at like core sticky versus flexible inflation, sticky inflation stuck above 3%. So again, I think what's happened is the Fed cut last year because they were worried about downside risks to the employment sector, to the labor market. Now they're worried about upside risk to inflation. And you could kind of see it, the downside risks to the labor market have disappeared. So whether or not you want to look at one report, the moving average on payrolls is running about 110,000. It's well above break evens. I think their presence has now shifted much more to inflation, which is the elephant in the room, and it's not the labor market.
Mark, many currencies, not just emerging market currencies, but I suppose particularly emerging market currencies, were just beginning to find their feet again, right? After months of turmoil thanks to the war. Now you also have very unsynchronized central banks. What does it all mean for potential turmoil in currency markets in the next month or two?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because our view here is that there hasn't been full participation in the dollar. You could call it like a multi-phase dollar. Dollar rallied against G10, dollars rallied against EM Asia to some degree. If you look at the Korean won, it's been one of the weakest performer currencies on the year. But it hasn't strengthened against all the LATAM currencies, maybe except Chilean peso. Where I think this is going is the market's kind of like figuring out what kind of regime, what kind of state it wants to be in. Rates are becoming much more a focus for markets. A hawkish central bank, what that's doing is that's impacting EM, because the rate differentials and kind of the carry story in LATAM is not as compelling, because these are the most overvalued currencies. For the last couple of years, a lot of people wanted to sell the dollar because they said it's expensive. What's interesting is the dollar is no longer as expensive on our models. What we kind of see is LATAM is very expensive and Asia is very cheap. So essentially, the market is basically the most overbought position in FX right now is the carry trade. So I would say the thing that I'm worried about here is this kind of feeds into EM and it starts to knock LATAM lower. Some of the favorite trades of the year, like Brazil, people have really loved Colombia. Those are, I think, positions that are at risk now. And I think the dollar strengthening on the back of higher interest rates or a stronger Fed or continued data is not a reason to buy Asia value. So value in FX is still a trap. So I think we're stuck with what feels like a broad dollar, stronger for at least the next 3 months, is which we'll see the DXY touch at least 103. That's euro around 111, 110. And that's where I think things are going to start to peak out.
Wow. OK, so the DXY right now at 101.12. So that would be quite the move. Treasuries, not the safe haven play that it would seem. Neither is gold, Mark. So why should the dollar be the safe haven?
I think part of it, right? You do not want to buy gold when real rates are going up. I think it's a very simple trade. Gold has really benefited from what people classified last year as a debasement trade. That debasement trade is kind of miraging itself as what looks like Goldilocks, which was financial conditions are easing, global growth was picking up. There was a story that as long as rates are going lower and there's a lot of political uncertainty coming from the U.S., pension funds, sovereign wealth fund, international investors are going to hedge their dollar exposure. There's been very little evidence of that outside of like the early stress period in April. But that kind of created this story around the debasement trade. And that's where gold and silver, Bitcoin, these things did really well. But basically, they were just trades where real rates are going lower and gold benefited. So I think the big thing here, again, is that positioning in gold is now kind of back to more neutral levels. But if the dollar continues to advance and it's being driven primarily by a rates factor, gold is in trouble. So there's another leg lower that gold can go. And again, very similar story with Bitcoin. These are not safe haven assets. In an environment where the Fed's hiking, U.S. equities are outperforming, even if they're more volatile, that's a dollar market.
Really briefly, Mark, we're actually back at 162.47 on the yen again. I thought it was perhaps back into safe territory. Will it be okay? I mean, will the Bank of Japan hike soon enough for, you know, those selling the yen to run for the hills?
So this is primarily the operation of the value trap in FX. People want to buy Korea, they want to buy the yen, they want to buy Taiwan, they want to buy some of these low yielding currencies. Again, I would advise this is not the time to buy FX value. There's so many things that has to happen in Japan. Number one, the Fed just has to be much more dovish. They have to say, we're not hiking rates, we're going to focus on cutting rates. The economy is evolving. So there's a very, very, very low probability of moving in that direction. The other side of it is the BOJ is extremely far behind the curve. And they're basically like reinforcing fiscal dominance and fiscal policy that's coming from the government in Japan. So essentially what you're seeing is while real rates are going up in the US, they're actually going down in Japan. And our models are telling us that dollar yen should be trading at 160 to 165. I don't think we should be worried about intervention at 163. I think we should maybe be worried intervention at 165, and we're in a 160, 165 range for a longer period of time here in dollar yen.
Mark, thank you so much. Very appreciate you joining us this morning of all mornings. Mark McCormick of BMO Capital Markets. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Hedge funds posting their strongest first half in 5 years. According to Pivotal Path, the industry returned 7.2% on average through June, with tech-focused funds posting a much bigger return than that, helped by that rally in chip stocks. And Exxon profits jump in the second quarter, the $3.7 billion rise in profits driven by higher oil prices. Profits also boosted by gains in the company's refining and chemical businesses. Coming up, President Trump scheduled to meet more NATO leaders after just saying this hour the ceasefire with Iran is over in his opinion. More on that next.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them.
President Trump calling the U.S.-Iran ceasefire a waste of time there, and his comments coming after Washington struck more than 80 sites in Iran in retaliation for attacks against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government joins us now from Washington. These comments caught the market at least by surprise, Kate, even though we had movement overnight, right? Those 80 attacks and also, you know, the revoking of the sanctions waiver. Is it possible that President Trump could be reeled in, that perhaps his people will say, okay, that's enough now, or what happens next?
But there's a lot of uncertainty, and as you've seen with the oil and gas prices, there's a lot of volatility that's been, connected to this conflict with Iran. NATO officials, President Trump is there in Turkey for these, this NATO summit. NATO officials did say, that Iran was violating the ceasefire. So there is some, maybe international agreement. But it certainly puts more uncertainty, globally, but also here as we're, focusing on the U.S. midterm elections that are coming up, where affordability, oil and gas prices have been, main talking points, especially for Democrats. Republicans have been concerned about when the price of gas was rising because of the conflict there in Iran. So a lot of uncertainty, both here in the United States as well as abroad.
Yeah, and gasoline prices are not back to where they were before the war started. Also, as you point out, he may have felt emboldened by his reception at NATO. The leaders were very, very welcoming of him, and Mark Rutte in particular, saying very nice things to President Trump about him. Domestically, I want to point to a story. Obamacare premiums, Kate, are poised for a second straight double-digit jump. We're just seeing this coming out now, that it's another 14% on top of a 20% jump. Does that mean fewer people will be insured?
Most likely. I mean, that's what we saw this year. Congress was not able to come to an agreement to renew these premium subsidies that had been in place, during the COVID era. So people saw, people on the Obamacare program saw their premiums really go up. I think it was something like 20% this year. And yes, our reporting has been that, people have dropped out of the program. They have not been able to afford it, and so they don't sign up for this year, and then that could happen again next year too, with premiums to be going up double digits yet again. This is something that Democrats, especially on the campaign trail, have talked about. It fits in with their message on affordability. Healthcare affordability is something that people on both sides of the aisle are talking about. Obviously, constituents, voters in America have seen rising health prices because of this, but also other reasons as well.
And it's a vicious cycle. The fewer healthier people that sign up, then the more expensive premiums become, of course. Kate, thank you so much. Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government in Washington. Oil extending gains amid mounting tensions between Washington and Tehran. The U.S. had also walked back that waiver allowing new sales of Iranian oil. Bloomberg's Mitchell Furman joins us now. Mitch, we're headed towards 80 on Brent, 75 on WTI. Does this reflect the reality of the situation, that things may be escalating, the Strait may be starting to close again, and Iran should not be selling oil anymore, to U.S. partners at least?
Yeah, well, the ceasefire, the tentative ceasefire ending brings traffic through the Strait of Hormuz back into question. This comes after yesterday's was the biggest attack since that tentative ceasefire came into effect last month. The ships hit in the Strait of Hormuz include 2 large oil tankers and 1 Qatari gas carrier. So now the question becomes, what will traffic look like through the Strait?
Had it resumed fully, Mitch? I mean, how many tankers were we seeing going through the Strait? And did the attack in the last day or two, the small number of attacks that we have seen, were they causing shippers to second guess their plans?
Yeah, I mean, there had been a trickle of ships coming through Hormuz in recent weeks. It had increased a little bit since that tentative ceasefire went into effect last month. It all kind of varied based on companies and ship owners' risk appetites. We saw a lot of the Western large oil companies be kind of the most hesitant, and a lot of this also revolves around insurance and how willing insurance companies are to insure these ships.
Mitch, where were we on refilling inventories and stockpiles and so on? It felt like things were really coming to a conclusion, and that countries and sovereigns and companies could start refilling those tanks. Did we get anywhere with that?
Yeah, no, refilling is definitely a longer-term question. Especially, China has been the big one for a lot of oil market watchers to follow, as their massive inventories have, a lot of folks are seeing those draw down a bit. Obviously, there was the coordinated International Energy Agency drawdown. So countries are still, stocks have been dwindling globally, and they the refilling, likely won't happen until this the Strait of Hormuz really reopens.
All right, Mitch, thank you so much. We'll be keeping our eye trained on the oil markets. Bloomberg's Mitchell Furman. Turning to tech, because of course that's firmly in investors' radars as well. Today, the AI rotation trade gathering pace overnight in Asia, with investors pulling out of Korean chip makers and actually turning to Chinese tech stocks, sending shares of Alibaba, for example, higher, but also Tencent. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence joins. So briefly, Matt, we are now in a bear market in Korea. Is it a permanent situation, or do we see some buying again?
I think that kind of largely depends on what happens next in the whole kind of AI demand story. I think what we saw this week with the Samsung results was that the market's largely caught up with where demand is. It's been massively behind for a few months, and the numbers were a little bit ahead, but not much ahead. So I think the view now is that difficult to see where the next upside surprise comes from. And so whilst we're in that kind of pause, the momentum shifts to kind of more underloved parts of the tech market. And that's why we've seen the kind of swing into Alibaba and some more interest in Chinese tech stocks in the Hang Seng. I think there's been obviously issues recently about kind of muted demand in China, particularly for e-commerce, but some of the kind of preview notes coming out from brokers, particularly for Alibaba, suggest that actually that there might be some improving momentum both in terms of revenue and profit for that company, and that perhaps investors have undercooked their appreciation of the value that's there in some of these big China tech stocks.
Yeah, and just looking for something cheaper, right? Almost anything is cheaper these days than some of the stocks in the Kospi. Now, we're also hearing that OpenAI is set to release its most advanced model widely now on Thursday. So we have 3 tiers, Sol, Terra and Luna, and apparently they can sell it to anybody. The government has pulled back, according to Axios. How is the model performing that we know of? Is it doing better than other models?
Yeah, I've not personally kind of seen too many kind of hard stats yet, but I think this is a kind of a positive development for OpenAI, and I think kind of more broadly for the US large language model developers, including Anthropic, because obviously we had that surprise move recently from the US government putting a block on Mythos, and the fact that companies are now able to kind of work with the US administration to actually get models approved and out there for commercial use is encouraging. I think for OpenAI, this definitely kind of helps them to maybe establish some fresh momentum relative to Anthropic. So yeah, overall I think an encouraging move.
All right, Matt, thank you so much. Never a dull moment. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, we're going to set you up for what's going to be a difficult trading day next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now a look at some of what's ahead today. President Trump expected to speak in the 9 a.m. hour from the NATO Summit. We also get June's FOMC minutes out at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then earnings from Levi Strauss coming after the market. But of course, all eyes are going to be on so many things today, from potential escalation in the Middle East after President Trump declared the ceasefire pretty much dead as far as he was concerned. He said that negotiators could continue negotiating, but ultimately they'd have to come back to him. And he feels like the whole thing is a waste of time. He spoke after speaking with Mark Rutte in Ankara at the NATO conference, and this is your picture following those remarks. Oil really reacting. We're put on $5 or $6 on WTI. We're headed towards 80 on Brent, although we're obviously well off our peaks. European gas futures higher, and futures pointed lower, though they were thanks to the chip trade. Anyway.